Good morning, guys. It is April 21st, 2020. Welcome to algebra class. We have a focus question today. How do I use factoring and zero product property to solve equations? So we're going to combine everything we know about factoring and zero product property, and we're going to combine that to solve equations today. You will not believe this. I have run out of all my amazing jokes, but I have a riddle of the day. I'm going to share this riddle with you, and then when the lesson is over, when you're done watching the video, you will see the same riddle in the Google chat. Post your response, but please do so privately so others do not see your response, and then you will earn 10% extra credit on this assignment. So once again, Google chat, answer the riddle, and in order to privately message me in chat, you click on my name and send me a private message. So our riddle of the day is this. You have two US coins whose total value is 30 cents. One of them is not a nickel. What are the two coins? I'll let you think about that. Send me your answer on Google chat privately after the lesson today. All right, so I already shared with you the focus question. How do I use factoring and zero product property to solve equations? So over the last week and a half, we've been talking about expressions and how we could write them in two different ways. We could write them in expanded form and we could write them in factored form. And that when they're written in factored form, if it's equal to zero and we have an equation, we could use the zero product property. So we're going to work through that today. All right, here we go. So let's take an equation like 12x to the third plus 15x squared equals 0. Now remember, I'm trying to solve this equation, and I want to make sure I could transform it into a form that's easy for me to work with. So when I'm looking at this, I notice it's an expanded form, but it is equal to 0. So the first step here is if there's a greatest common factor, I am going to factor that out. And I'm going to do this without my factor or expansion boxes. So this is what I'm going to do. So when I think of this, the first thing I need to think about is, what is the greatest common factor? Well, first I'm going to look at my coefficients, 12 and 15. What's the greatest common factor of 12 and 15, or the largest number that will divide in evenly to 12 and 15? And that would be 3. Now I'm going to look at my variable part, and I see I have an x to the third power, x to the second power. That means I have at least 2 copies of x in both of those terms. So I'm going to factor out the x squared. So I have just factored out 3x squared. So if I factor that out, let's see what I have left. So I'm just going to go the opposite way. So I have 3x squared, and I need to multiply that by something to go back to 12x to the third power. And that would be 4x to the first power, just 4x. Now, with the second term, I need to go from 3x squared to 15x squared. And in order to do that, I'm going to multiply by 5. So it's going to be plus 5. And this is also, let me erase this here, still equal to 0. I like to test it at this point to make sure I factored correctly. So I'm just going to distribute, and I can see this in my head. 3x squared times 4x would be 12x to the third power, and 3x squared times 5 would be 15x squared. So this expression in factored form is equivalent to the one in expanded form on top of it. Great. So now, if you look at this, I have a quantity, 3x squared, times another quantity, 4x squared plus 5. So I have one part times another part, and that equals a product of 0. So that means either the yellow piece or the orange piece or both have to be 0 because I'm multiplying them together to get 0. So that means either 3x squared equals 0 or 4x plus 5 equals 0. So I have two equations. If I do the first one, I'm going to get x by itself, so I have to divide both sides by 3. I have x squared equals 0. So if I take the square root of x squared is x, the square root of 0 is just 0. All right, so I'm going to move this over so it's easy to work with. Now, I'm going to solve the other equation. So I'm just going to subtract 5 on both sides. And I have 4x equals negative 5. Divide both sides by 4. And then I'm going to get x equals negative 5/4. So I could write that in a different way. I could write that as negative 1 1/4. If I actually divided that, that would be negative 1.25 if I wrote it in decimals, but it is okay to write it in an improper fraction. Actually, you will see that more often than not. So here's your solution. X equals 0, and x can equal negative 5/4. All right, let's move on. So let's go through the next part. I'll walk you through this. I'm going to pause at different spots and ask you just to write this out in your notes. So take a look at this equation. 9x to the third plus 6x squared equals 0. Think about it. Write out your first move. Pause it right now. Complete your first move and then come back to the video. All right. Welcome back. I hope you factored out the greatest common factor and notice that this is an expanded form. So in order to use zero product property, we need to write it in factored form. So we're going to factor out our greatest common factor. So we have 9 and 6. Greatest common factor there is 3. And then we have x to the third power and x to the second. Each of those pieces or terms, the variable part has at least x squared in it, or 2 copies of x. So I am going to factor out 3x squared. Now, if I'm going to think about this, opposite of factoring is distributive property. To go from 3x squared to 9x to the third power, I'm going to have to multiply by 3x. And then going from 3x squared, let me rewrite that a little neater. To go from 3x squared to 6x squared, 3x squared times what gives me 6x squared? That would be 2. So plus 2. Then like I said in the earlier one, I want to make sure I factor correctly, so I'll just do it in my head. 3x squared times 3x, yes, that's 9x to the third power. And 3x squared times 2, it works, it's 6x squared. All right, figure out your next move, guys. Pause it, think about what to do next, and then come back shortly. All right, welcome back. So hopefully you saw that we're in a great spot to use our zero product property. So we have a factor here, 3x squared, and we have a factor here, 3x plus 2. If we multiply them together to get 0, it means either the purple term or the green quantity have to equal 0. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to write it out. 3x squared equals 0, or 3x plus 2 equals 0. Now I'm just gonna solve these equations. X squared equals 0. So just like before, we know when we get to this point, we take the square root, x is 0. And then we'll solve this linear equation. And then we have 3x equals -2 divided by 3. X equals -2/3. All right, so there's two solutions to this problem, x equals 0 and x equals -2/3, or x equals -2/3. So let's look at one more. So I want you to look at this one, and I want you to think, how is this different from the ones we were looking at before? How was it different? So you probably noticed in this equation, we don't have that equals 0 part. And when we're working with these types of expressions, we need, in order to use zero product property, we need the equation to equal 0. So we could do that in one move. If we did this, just subtracted -15x squared on both sides, look what we would have. On the left side of the equation, we have 9x to the third minus 15x squared. And on the right side, 15x squared minus 15x squared is 0. So we are, at this point, in a good spot. And we could take it from there. Remember, greatest common factor, we're going to factor it out. And that greatest common factor here, 3x squared. We're going to, if we factor out 3x squared, that's 3x on the inside, minus 5. So we're going to write, remember, we're in a great spot now to use zero product property because we have an expression in factored form that equals 0. So that I know either the green piece or the blue piece has to equal 0. So 3x squared equals 0. By now you already know the pattern, divided by 3. This is just going to be x squared equals 0, which means x equals 0. And then 3x minus 5 equals 0. Add 5 to both sides. 3x equals 5. Divided by 3. X equals 5/3. So x equals 0. And x equals 5/3. All right, so two things you're going to post in the chat today. I'm going to actually set up two different threads. First, you're going to have the exit ticket. Solve the following equation, show all work. What is the solution to 8x to the third minus 18x squared equals 0? Post that on the chat, and also remember to post the answer to the riddle. Have a great day, guys. Make sure also, if you have any questions, I'll be in Google Chat to 9 to 11. Send your work back to me, and I will be providing feedback. Talk to you guys tomorrow.